Hi, Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. I'm with Arup today, and we're going to be talking about why salespeople need to be trusted advisors.
Wonderful.
Arup, where can people find you?
The simplest place to find me is on LinkedIn. That's I think the easiest place.
It is. So, salespeople and trust. You spent your entire career across sales ops, marketing ops, analytics, enablement. What led you to focus so deeply on trust as the critical differentiator in modern B2B sales?
Yeah, I think there's a number of different factors. And so I started looking at, this is, I'd say going back about a year and a half ago. For me, just trying to find that leverage that exists in B2B commercial relationships that can help elevate that relationship. I suppose I'd love to be able to say that, part of the driver was that, we now exist in an environment where trust and authenticity and human connection authenticity is coming kind of looser and looser and looser and looser and looser. And there's a lot of dialogue, as I'm sure you're aware, Tim, I'm sure your listeners are aware, there's a lot of dialogue on LinkedIn about, and a lot of question marks and a lot of kind of skepticism about what is genuine content versus what is AI generated content,
Yep.
right? So I think this whole notion of trust is very prevalent in the environment at the moment. I'd love to say that was the driver to it, but it's not actually. To be fair, I think I've always been interested in, again, what is that pivot point or leverage point that a B2B commercial representative, salesperson, account manager can utilize to be able to facilitate and kind of make those relationships, those B2B relationships, much more effective. So something that I started to look at about 18 months ago.
In your research, expertise consistently ranks as the biggest driver of trust, above likability or similarity. Why do you think expertise matters so much today, and what does real expertise look like in a sales conversation?
Yeah, so I think there's two parts to this, actually. So I sent you over some materials just to kind of the 8 strategies that a salesperson could be and should be thinking about, and that was just to kind of make, in some respects, to keep it simple. But there's two parts. There's two parts to that commercial relationship, right? There's the buyer side, and then there's the seller side. Actually, the kind of research that I've done on the buyer side very clearly indicates that there's 5 sort of cognitive processes, a kind of a mental arithmetic set of processes that we go through when we're kind of very quickly mentally testing out whether an individual is the type of person that we trust. And so therefore in a commercial relationship, is that individual the type of person that we would continue to expand that commercial engagement with. And those 5 kind of cognitive processes come down to capability, predictability, intentionality, calculative, and then transference. And the first one of those is capability, which is, do I believe the salesperson or account manager that I'm talking to is actually genuinely capable? And it's that very quick sort of, almost in the second, mental arithmetic that we kind of do to be able to sort of make a sometimes very quick decision about whether we genuinely trust someone, whether we genuinely trust their ability to kind of carry forward a particular type of engagement. So on the seller side, of course, one of the most important strategies that you can execute to match against that buyer mental arithmetic is improving your expertise and improving your experience.
Yeah, I know. In my sales career, I've always wanted to actually understand the buyer's business, and I think that's so important. You talk about the role of a personal reputation, independent of the company a salesperson represents. What can sellers do to build a trustworthy online presence, especially on LinkedIn?
Well, I'm not the person to answer that. I think probably if I try to take a crack at that, I will do it in injustice. And I think I'd be embarrassed to try to give you the answer to that. That just doesn't seem like a fair question to ask me at all, Tim. Quite a loaded question.
Based on your knowledge, you must understand what an online trustworthy presence look like.
Yeah, completely. So I think, again, you are without a shadow of a doubt the expert here, right? So I'll obviously play back the little that I've learned and the kind of playbooks that I've utilized. So first premise on this is, And again, from the research that I've done, and clearly this is a fairly obvious statement. If you come from a very recognized brand, then by its very nature, in a B2B commercial relationship, the company that you come from, the brand value and the brand recognition will add to, it will help influence the trust and that kind of trust building process. But that doesn't necessarily mean that if you come from a unrecognized brand, that there's no way that you can build trust. Of course you can. The first thing, of course, is we've talked a lot about expertise and experience and bringing that kind of that mindset, that point of view, that consultative approach, problem solving approach to your prospect or indeed your existing customer. The other piece, of course, is that whole process around, well, how do you, if you don't have the privilege to a certain extent of coming from a branded, recognized company, how do you go about building some of that that personal trust to be able to supplement that kind of that gap in sort of brand recognition. And LinkedIn is a perfectly good way of doing it, an exceptionally good way of doing it. The model, of course, always talks about being able to convey. Increasingly, the model on LinkedIn is talking about being able to convey, proof points, problem solving, and something that's personal as well. So those three P's around being personable, being and showing your personality, of course, highlighting problems and then calling out how you help those problems, and then clearly showcasing some proof points as well, and getting the right blended model in terms of the content that you convey. LinkedIn's complicated, and you know that far more than I do, but it's just that constant mechanism of just making sure that you're present there and being present in an authentic manner across those three P's.
One of the most common challenges for sellers is getting the cadence of communication right. How can salespeople balance staying present without overwhelming the buyer?
That's a great question. So
I got a ding as well.
Oh, blimey! Will that have? My apologies. Will that have recorded?
It is recorded, yes.
Okay. Why don't we? Do you mind asking the question again, and then you can obviously chop that bit out.
Oh, sure. Okay. Count to three.
Yes.
One of the most common challenges for sales is getting the cadence of communication right. How can salespeople balance staying present without overwhelming the buyer?
I think so. Yeah, I think the cadence of communication is really key, right? So I think, again, one of the kind of key strategies is having a decent frequency of communications with your buyer. You're absolutely right to point out that an overset of communications can be overwhelming, and equally an underset of communications can be very underwhelming as well. Let me just address this, I suppose, from a buyer's perspective. I've been a buyer on many occasions. So yes, whilst I've been looking at the value of trust, clearly, I kind of also love to look at this through the lens of the buyer. When a salesperson is appropriate in terms of the amount and the level and the consistency of communications with me, it's wonderful. Now, again, I think being upfront, utilizing techniques like the Sandler contract in terms of just getting an agenda in shape, ensuring that agenda gets sent out. I think that's fantastic, because I think that shows that a salesperson is owning not just the communication, not just the preemptive activity, but also taking real ownership of how that conversation is going to play out when we all get into the conversation. Equally, I think just check-in communications before that sort of meeting, just to ensure that everything's on point and on track and everybody's still able to make it. That commitment to the agenda and keeping to the agenda, I think, are absolutely all fine. Equally, I think as you roll out of the meeting, post-meeting communications, I think those are very, 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 very essential, because oftentimes within the meeting, in fact, apologies, wrapping up the meeting with a communication at the end of the meeting, to be able to kind of capture and articulate all of the kind of the key minutes and actions that were discussed, especially the actions that were discussed in that, and setting out commitments against that, I think is absolutely key. I think one of the key pieces that I just want to very quickly highlight on that, I think this is an interesting skill, and an interesting skill to have, because it does genuinely, in my view, in my experience, it does genuinely build trust. I think in today's world, with things like conversation intelligence and note takers, etc., it is easy to not worry about taking down some of the action points and kind of going, well, we don't need to worry about that, because actually I'm going to get my I'm going to get my synopsis, and I'm going to get all of the key pieces that we talked about after the call, and I'll be able to communicate that. Totally get that. I do think, whilst it might seem counterintuitive, I do think that there's real value in kind of getting to the end of that meeting, that end of that call, and a key communication point there being, this is broadly what we discussed. Of course, the note taker is taking all of the items in detail. So if there's anything that I've missed, I'll be able to pick up on that after the call. But here's 2 or 3 key action items that we discussed. And actually, here's my commitment in terms of getting those over to you. I think that rounds out and closes the call. And again, I think it shows ownership from a salesperson's perspective. And then equally, once you've rolled out the call and you get towards, end of end of day, next day, etc., ensuring that kind of that commitment around what were the actions, the follow-ups against those actions, having all of those executed, I think those are all part of the process. And for me, that cadence of communication feels like a really positive way to be able to manage a buyer's expectations, and also kind of give them that sense of their time is important, and so being really clear around the way that time is managed is crucial.
Yeah, I think that active listening is still a soft skill that you need to have. Whether that's going into the meeting and saying, "Are we talking about this?" and then and this is what we agreed. So there may be note takers, but at the end of the day, you need to show that you've actually listened to the meeting and you know what's going to happen.
Completely.
So you redefine similarity as shared values and working styles, not superficial commonalities. How can sellers quickly identify and adapt to a buyer's working style without feeling manipulative or scripted?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And so I've reflected on this a lot as well, because I thought, I was looking at that similarity piece, and does that mean that, is that the usual kind of rapport building strategies of, oh, I see your kids' photos in the background, where are they, all of this business? Maybe there is a little bit of that, but I also think that there can be, again, I think you can tune into an individual and understand some of their working styles, and then kind of very quickly align against that working style. I think as a salesperson, it's incumbent on you, wherever possible, to be able to do some of the research to understand the individual that you're talking to, so that you can start to dial into that working style that they have. And as soon as you start to dial into that working style that they have, even if your style is not directly similar to that style, what you're doing is effectively creating a similarity of connection. And that naturally means that the sort of the dialogue and the energy and the connection between the two individuals becomes a lot smoother.
Likability in sales, it isn't just about being charming, it's about being easy to work with. What are some of the behaviors that instantly increase likability and reduce friction in early conversations?
Yeah, so I mean, again, I think it's very much that piece around similarity. There's a kind of a crossover point between similarity and likability. You can, of course, clearly drive some of the sort of the components of likability through rapport. I do, and coming out, obviously do think that having a bit more of a kind of an understanding of relationship, that kind of, it's that whole piece around the meeting before the meeting, or the meeting after the meeting, or the meeting that happens in the break if it's a very long meeting. It's those connection points that allow you to sort of build some of the relationship and start to create a little bit more informal energy there. I think that informal energy helps build some of the likability. Again, you don't have to be you don't have to be charming. You don't have to be. You absolutely don't have to be some of the the classic views that we have of salespeople. I do think increasingly when and to be fair, when I started working, and within a few years, I'd done my first Myers-Briggs. And
Oh, yeah.
I was acutely aware that I was an INTJ, so
Okay.
essentially more of an introverted energy as opposed to an extroverted energy. I think that kind of the classic view is that salespeople have to be extroverted types in the kind of the Myers-Briggs framework. Whereas actually, I think increasingly over the last 10 years, 10, 15 years, I've started to reconsider that and kind of go, actually, I think you can be introverted, but bring the right energy, bring the right connectivity, ensure that you're being really intentional in terms of those pre-meeting, the meeting in between the meeting, the post-meeting, etc., being really intentional in terms of those connection points to be able to build out some of that engagement.
Integrity is often broken in small moments, like not sending the follow-up you promised. What are the simple day-to-day habits sellers can adopt to demonstrate reliability and strengthen trust?
Yeah, I think that's fundamentally one of it. I think if you say that you're going to do something, then you should do it. And in fact, I want to kind of obviously reflect on one point. So this is again going back probably about a year or so. I was working as a buyer and talking to a seller, and we don't need to talk about the company or anything like that. They were essentially, from a European context, very well prized and thought of within their service. Now, as it so happens, I ended up going with, because I had at the time the company I was working for some pressure from our US organization, so my kind of peer colleagues in the US that had elected to go with a different supplier, a direct competitor of the supplier that I was talking to in Europe. I ended up having to go that route and kind of aligning with a broader kind of global vendor strategy there. Now, I mentioned to my vendor here locally in Europe, look, folks, don't worry. This isn't the end of it. At some point in the not too distant future, we'll have to look at that overarching contract, look at it on a global basis, and then try to figure out what's the best way forward. So I am still happy to facilitate a head-to-head test of the data, our data, our information, etc., that they process and provide some enhancements to blah blah blah. I'm happy to still run a head-to-head test of our data in obviously in a sensitive, anonymized manner of your capabilities versus US vendor capabilities. I think what I found surprising and disappointing was, after many months of conversation here in the UK with the European vendor, unfortunately it didn't play out. That's life. I think what I found really disappointing there was some offhand promises of, yeah, that's great. We'll connect you with XYZ person in our company. We'll all work together for that head to head, and then nothing materialized. And I get it. I get that, once the closed lost is in the books, so the closed lost is against that opportunity record, the salesperson is naturally moving on to the next opportunity, and I'm fully qualified out. But I did think that was disappointing, and that's kind of one of those moments where I've started to go, well, where is the integrity here? We don't have to rush at this, and this doesn't have to be something that we do overnight. But where is the integrity around, actually, yes, we set, and I'm showing commitment. I'm not the person stepping away from this engagement going, well, we're done, we've gone with the US vendor, please leave me alone, etc. I'm the one saying, actually happy to continue to have this conversation and happy to continue to help champion it. Very disappointed that it didn't come to pass.
Yeah. You emphasize that communication is less about great pitching and more about deep listening. What does good listening actually look like in practice, and how can sellers train this skill?
This is a tough one. So, again, by no means am I expecting this, because I'm continually working on improving my listening skills. Continually, I think I've always been working on improving my listening skills. So you mentioned active listening, and I think there are a number of different strategies. Actually, I would absolutely recommend that if your listeners haven't read the 7 habits, that they should, because that absolutely has a whole chapter dedicated to active listening in it. And it's a really, really, really good piece of text. Insofar as kind of talking about different strategies around how to be present, about how to play back, how to actively listen, how to play back, how to ensure that you're capturing all of that content. What I'd add to that, of course, is in a working environment, and it's great to be able to read that and great to be able to reflect on that at home, etc. I think in a working environment, there is opportunity. Sometimes it feels uncomfortable, but there is opportunity to be able to kind of acquire a mentor or a coach. It doesn't have to be your immediate line leader, because again, sometimes that can be a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit awkward. Totally understand that. But getting a coach or getting a mentor from another part of the organization is really valuable, particularly if that mentor is slightly more senior and is going to be on a number of different sales calls or commercial engagement calls, etc. They have an opportunity to even just observe, your one's active listening skills, and provide some guidance and provide some sort of steer post observation. So I think those are the types of techniques. Do some reading, practice some of the skills, reflect on that at home, and then in the workplace, try to find a coach and or mentor that would be in a position to be able to provide some support. We've talked about, again, just a second ago, conversation intelligence. So I think that and note takers are all fantastic ways. But what I would say is that it's very few salespeople, and understand time is limited, but it's very few salespeople that oftentimes go back and actually listen to those call recordings.
Arup Chakravarti, thank you so much for coming on and talking about why salespeople need to be trusted advisors. So if people wanted to reach out and talk to you, where do they need to go?
Well, again, come to LinkedIn. You'll be able to find me. Hopefully, all of the details, you'll publish some of the details around me, or that there should be some
your LinkedIn will be in the show notes, and anything else that you have on LinkedIn that you have a connection will be in there as well.
Perfect. I am a daily user of LinkedIn.
You are very much.
And you send me a message, I will respond pretty much immediately.
Excellent. Arup, thank you so much for